Well, for more insight into China's animation industry, I spoke to Christopher Colman. He's an animation writer, designer, and producer, and has worked in China's animation industry for 6 years. I started by asking what it was like to work in a Chinese studio.
Well, I mean, I know the stereotypes are of sweatshops or something like that, but I have to say that the experience I had when I worked actually in production was extremely positive. The people around me were very friendly. It was a very communal atmosphere, people living together, eating together every day. For the animators themselves, I was a designer. For some of the animators, things got quite intense at times when they were working on outsourcing projects. You know, they'd have a deadline to hit, so they'd be working sometimes throughout the night. But for me, you know, it was a relatively relaxed atmosphere. We were developing new projects, so it was important that we had that relaxed feeling in the studio.
And how has the industry changed over the years, and what's really been driving some of the changes?
Well, the key change really has been since the 80s or the mid-80s, for 20 or 25 years, China was really known and became the world's sort of outsourcing destination for animation. And as the country has developed and wages have risen, that model kind of doesn't really work anymore. And so alongside that, you've had this amazing set of opportunities opening up for creators of intellectual property. You have the rise of the middle class with money to spend on entertainment. You have all the new theatres, theme parks, digital platforms opening up across the country. And there really has been a lack of local creators over the last 30 years in China. So there's this big vacuum of platforms and opportunities to monetize content. And so you have lots of new companies and studios and investors rushing in to try to fill that vacuum.
And tell us about your experience in terms of the creativity that you've seen in China. How has that developed?
Well, creativity in China has obviously faced challenges. As China has evolved from this outsourcing model to an original creator model, that's not an overnight process. You know, companies in the West like Disney have evolved that process over 50, 60, even 100 years. And you know, you imagine a clothing factory that suddenly wants to design its own fashion range. That's not going to come overnight. One of the big issues that the industry faces now is that a lot of investors are jumping into this new field and rushing products through, whereas they should be spending more time on nurturing that creativity, that story.
And so with so much investment going in, how valuable would you say the market is, being that it does spill over into so many things like merchandising, etc.?
It's hard to put a number on it, but I would say that there's a huge opportunity in China at the moment, and as I say, there are a lot of new players coming into it. But at the same time, it's a very risky market. It's an unproven market, and people are not sure what works there. There have been huge breakout successes, but then there have been big failures. So people aren't really sure what's going to work there. It's a very diverse, it's a huge population. So that's the biggest challenge that these companies are facing at the moment.
So for people at home who perhaps aren't that familiar with a lot of the projects that have come out of China, what are some of the more famous ones that people either should be aware of or perhaps should be looking out for on the horizon?
Well, I think in the animation world, there really wasn't much of great note until perhaps around 2015. Before that, we were sort of seeing the hangover from this outsourcing era where the quality wasn't so great and it was quite childish content. But around 2015, there were a couple of breakout hits. There was Monster Hunt, which was a live-action animation hybrid, and there was The Monkey King Hero Returns, which was a full CG animation. Both shattered box office records and sort of set in motion all these new studios jumping into the market to try and capitalize on the opportunities. And I think over the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see the first wave of films coming out from those new studios. And it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of films they make, what kind of stories they tell, and how those stories resonate in China and in the rest of the world.
Now, obviously, technology continues to change at a very rapid pace. So as you look ahead to the industry, what do you see as some of the potential really big developments that could really reshape it?
I wouldn't say there's necessarily going to be some breakout form of technology. Actually, China's already quite up there with the rest of the world in terms of the technology that they're using and the technical skill they have in operating that technology. As I said earlier, the real challenge for China is the storytelling aspect, and that's going to take time to evolve. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's going to be a technology that's going to change things. It's going to be quite a slow evolution for China. But it's going to be very interesting to see how it does develop over the next 2 to 3 years.